Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story in which OP, working an afternoon shift at a local bank as part of their college internship, learns that efficiency doesn't always win over a Karen boss. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Bank department manager wants me to work harder, not smarter. Circa 2010, I was working an afternoons gig at a local bank in part to complete an internship class for my coursework. The job entailed running batches of checks through a massive check scanner, manually running a tape using an old calculator called a 10 key with a printing function to make sure the checks match the deposits, and then hopping over to a computer to correct any errors on the teller or customer's part when the deposits were made. After the bank closed, 3 p.m., I was also the one who would stay and print out customer statements and run a long list of processes on multiple machines to update everyone's accounts with the day's transactions, upload the information to the website, back up and runs tapes on all of the bank's data, and sort and file through end-of-day reports for the different department managers to review the next morning. I would then lock up the bank and go home. In hindsight, quite a bit of responsibility for a college student, but it was a hometown bank. Now, my manager was a classic Karen before the term existed. She managed through fear, tried to cover it with small talk and banter, and didn't like anyone to shine except herself and the department. My two coworkers, full-time bank employees, would always discuss how terrible it was to work for her full-time. Anyway, I was raised to be respectful and work my hardest, which to me meant trying to be as quick at my job as possible, thus saving the company time and money. The closing duties I described took anywhere from 1.5 to 4 hours to complete, depending on which batch of statements we're printing and how often the crappy printers jammed. After about a month of doing this every day, I realized much of this time was due to the checklist I'd been trained with. It was doing one task at a time when actually more than one process could be done at once. Many times way out of order of the list, but you had to understand everything's part to really see this. I set about making these efficiencies and brought my time down to 0.5 to 2.5 hours after 2 months. I thought this would make my manager happy, but nothing was said about me getting out of there faster, so I just kept on doing my job as best I could. Fast forward 2 more months, and this bank is updating its servers to allow for real-time banking. Previously, unless I updated the website each night, balances and transactions wouldn't show up. They brought in 2 large server cases into the office I worked in, but it took another 3 to 4 weeks for the actual hardware to come in. Since the old servers were still installed, they set the empty towers right in the middle of our office. Now, our office was a very long room. The statement printers on one side and all the computers I had to work on each night at the other. Remember I said the printers jammed a lot? Well, with all the computers and servers on my end of the office, I never could hear the beep telling me they jammed, but I could see the red error light. This had historically been my little check. Every few minutes I'd turn around to make sure the printers hadn't jammed. I made sure I did this because every minute they weren't printing was another minute I'd be working. Statements took longer to print than the rest of my duties combined. However, the way they placed the empty server towers blocked my view, forcing me to have to get up and walk halfway to the printers each time to make sure they were jammed. So I simply turned them 90 degrees. Since the front and backs were full of air ventilation holes, this allowed me to maintain my line of sight, saving me and the bank time. Once again, I thought, great idea. No one's using these yet, and when they do, they won't be in that location anymore anyway. In hindsight, I should have known better. I came in around 2 p.m. after classes the next day and noticed the towers were turned back. I thought, that was odd. Why would anyone turn them back? I asked my coworker, and she told me the manager was pissed I touched them without asking, which, as I've learned later in life, was fair enough, but still an overreaction. I asked, had they being turned messed up some workflow I wasn't thinking of, but no, she hadn't even noticed them until about 11 a.m. when another employee mentioned they had been turned, so her reaction was pure malice for not having been asked. When she saw I'd come in, she pulled me aside and asked aggressively why I touched them, so thinking this was my chance to highlight my efficiencies, told her all I had done in an effort to make the closing routine more efficient. That was evidently the wrong answer. I was instructed to do the checklist exactly how it was laid out with no changes whatsoever because that's how it's supposed to be. Even though I'd been doing it my quicker way for 2 months already with no downsides. With regard to the printer, she told me to stop being lazy and get up and walk to it to check on it. Cue malicious compliance. I stopped caring about speed, followed the checklist to a T, and unless I had somewhere to be, didn't worry about checking on the printer very often. If it was still printing after my closing checklist was done, I could always read or do homework at my desk. Wouldn't want to be efficient with the bank's payroll after all. Suffice to say, I went back to taking 1.5 to 4 hours per night and costing the bank much more money in my checks. Good for me, I guess. Shortly after, I found a job working in an electronics department at a superstore and switched over with 2 weeks' notice. There wasn't time to train a new person, so that manager had to take over the night routine until a new one could be found. During my last day, I took it upon myself to try and give her some constructive criticism and how her management style affected me and stopped me from caring about my job. I'm not sure if it was effective, but at least I got it off my chest. I ran into one of my former coworkers at the store a few months later, and evidently someone else had out and out told my former manager she was a vile and mean person and she was probably going to hell for how she treated people. Part of her Karen persona was being very religious, and this seemed to have scared her into at least some meekness, at least according to my former coworker. Often it's the people with the least authority who use it the most. And our second story. Trying to cut the line so I'll serve you quicker? I don't think so. I work at Target, and this happened on Boxing Day. This time of year, it's always busy, and we had a line of around 10 customers waiting to be served. We sometimes have customers attempting to cut the line by walking through the way that they are meant to leave after purchasing their items, and that was the case with this lady. After I'm finishing serving a customer and my register's open, a lady practically runs from the entrance of the store, pushing in front of many customers, and puts a pair of shoes on my counter, demanding a refund. Now, our store recently had a policy change, so all refunds are handled at the lay-by counter, which is located at the back of the store. But I decided not to tell her that. Sorry, ma'am, but you'll have to go to the back of the line and wait like everybody else. She was clearly frustrated, but complied. After 5 or so minutes had passed and I'd served several other customers, she once again appears at my counter with the item she wanted refunded. Trying to hide the grin from my face, I said, "Oh, did you want a refund? They're handled at the lay-by counter, which is at the back of the store." She was livid. After yelling at me and demanding to see a manager, my supervisor, who'd seen the whole incident, walked over and explained that it was clearly an honest mistake on my part and she needed to go to the lay-by counter. Edit. Some of the terminology I use might be unfamiliar. Lay-by is the same as lay-away for Americans, and Boxing Day is the day after Christmas. And in Australia, most shops have huge sales, including Target. Thanks for this. That whole entitlement cutting in line nonsense makes my blood figuratively boil. I hate when people think they're somehow more important and in a bigger hurry than everyone else. And our last story. Family land was illegally sold. Back in the mid-1800s, my family donated a piece of land to the town under a clear agreement it could be used for a specific purpose, but if that purpose ever ceased, the land would be returned to the family. This was all documented back then, a handshake agreement solidified by legal paperwork, a common practice at the time. Fast forward to the early 2000s. The town decided to sell off the land. Naturally, my family and a handful of supportive townspeople raised questions pointing to the old agreement. The town did some research, and wouldn't you know it, the documentation conveniently went missing. No deed, no agreement, nothing. With no concrete proof in hand, the family, not in a position to engage in a lengthy legal battle, had no choice but to drop the issue. The land was sold, and for a while, that was the end of it. But recently, things took a frustrating turn. Construction of a luxury condo complex began on the land that, by all rights, should have reverted to my family. Every time I pass by, I can't help but think about the history and how we were essentially swindled out of what was rightfully ours. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I've started digging around, trying to find any shred of record about the original agreement. I know it's a long shot, but I'm combing through county records, historical archives, and even the town's minutes from way back in the day. If there's anything left of that original documentation, I'm going to find it. We even approached the current developers of the luxury condos, hoping to work something out or at least have a conversation about the land's history. Their response? Kick rocks. They couldn't care less about the history or the family agreement. They have their land, their permits, and their blueprints for those condos. The good news? My sister-in-law's a lawyer, and she's as stubborn as I am. She's now digging into the legal side, and with her knowledge of property law, we've got more than a fighting chance of getting to the bottom of this. There's a long road ahead, but if we can prove any part of that agreement or uncover any documentation, we might be able to make some noise and challenge the sale. Or at the very least, get compensated for the land our family gave away in good faith. Update. After months of relentless digging, my sister and I managed to find a crucial piece of evidence, a copy of an old town ledger that referenced the agreement from the 1800s. It wasn't the original document, but it was enough to show that the deal did exist and that the land was supposed to revert to our family if the specific use ever ceased. My sister-in-law filed an official inquiry with the town's legal department requesting a full investigation into the land's history. At first, the town tried to brush us off again, claiming the paperwork was lost and that too much time had passed. But this time we didn't stop there. My sister pulled in some legal heavy hitters and we threatened to take the case to court. The pressure worked. Suddenly, the town was a lot more cooperative. They agreed to open a formal review of the sale and the land's ownership history. Meanwhile, we reached out to the local press, and the story of a family fighting to reclaim their land donated in good faith started gaining traction. Public opinion began to sway in our favor, especially with the town's more historic-minded residents rallying behind us. There was outrage over the town's negligence in losing such important documents, and questions about why no one had ever been held accountable for it. The condo developers, sensing the growing tension and public scrutiny, were suddenly very interested in negotiating. They offered a settlement to avoid any further delays or legal complications on their end. We're still hammering out the details, but they've proposed a significant compensation package, and they're even considering a historical plaque on the property recognizing our family's original contribution to the town. It's not the full victory we hoped for, but with this settlement, my family will at least receive what we're owed. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.